Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Ask the Unfaithful. My name is Sam. I am so thankful that you're tuning in today. And as always, when we film these episodes, I've got my counterpart. He's too smart to be my colleague, but he is a best friend, and he is a hero of mine. I should just call you Dr. James Anir, as smart as you are, but we'll just stick with James. And you'll always be my Dr. James Anir. How are you, my good friend?
I am well. I don't even know
I
what
stumped you. I
you did
stumped you.
stump me. Yeah. PhDs, unfortunately for me, have to be earned. You
No,
know,
you basically have one. And today I can say that you have an honorary doctorate in today's question. And today's question, I think, is a brilliant one. It's more of a statement because we unfaithful are masters at avoiding, whether we're male or female, we love to avoid. And avoidance is probably the biggest tool in our toolbox, besides maybe defensiveness or blame shifting. But today, it's not really a question, it's more of a statement. 4 reasons the unfaithful avoid hard conversations. So I'll pitch it to you immediately. Why do we avoid hard conversations?
well, because they are awash in emotional complexity.
That's the dang truth right there.
Yeah. So a lot of people think, oh, well, it's just because we're not comfortable or we're uncomfortable with these hard conversations. And that is true. It isn't just about that, though, because it's more likely to be buried in something deeper. So it's a defense against, for the most part, re-experiencing a trauma in the past or a series of seriously negative events, right? End up feeling like we have to run or change the subject or that we simply can't talk about it. In general, if you're thinking of it in these terms, it really makes us feel like we're exposed, we're vulnerable, importantly, to emotional harm. And that's really important because A, that's what comes from the past, and B, is that really the case? That's something that we have to look at. So it's a perception that we're vulnerable to that emotional harm. We may not even be conscious. We wouldn't be able to say, well, I'm not going to talk about this because I feel like I'm vulnerable to you hurting me. It's generally just something that we react to, whether it's actually something that's going to cause us harm or not. That's the nature of harm that's inflicted at an early age. It feels like an existential threat when we're adults, even if that's completely illogical.
Now, the problem with all that is there's still a problem, right? Like avoidance, we avoiding hard questions. I mean, that's a great backstory, but there's still a problem with the fact that even if we're avoiding out of harm or fear of harm, rather,
Mm-hmm.
there's still a problem, right?
Yes, absolutely, because it's not getting the job done. We're avoiding, and thus we're not connecting. And that's the biggest disservice that we can do in any relationship is not connecting, not just to our partner, but to ourselves as well. And the bigger picture here is that these are deeply rooted blind spots. And how do we identify those blind spots? Well, really, wherever our resistance is, wherever we feel fear, that's how we identify them, because those are going to inhibit our path toward the connection and understanding of ourselves and by others. This is kind of paradoxical, but they actually give us understanding of our own blind spots because they show us these barriers. And that's really vital. That understanding that we can gain from seeing where those defenses are going to help us create a safe space for ourselves in order to discover truly who we are, all of our history and so on, find our path for healing, and then connect more fluidly and easily with our partner. Also, to be able to have those hard conversations.
I don't think that I've had any growth in my life over the past 20 plus years without having hard conversations. If it wasn't with therapist, it was with a coach. If it wasn't with one of them, it was with a close friend, a best friend, a partner. I mean, if I didn't have hard conversations, I would not at any level have the GED that I have in recovery work compared to your doctorate. So why do we avoid these hard conversations?
These are really the four things that we do or that really cause it or create those blind spots for us. And the first one is shame and undeserving. I don't know if I made that word up, but what it is it really comes from a feeling of being unworthy of just about anything. Now, we do have this, okay, so why do we act out? And do we reward ourselves? We give ourselves the gift of acting out when things go badly. So that's really a false worthiness, right? It's more like a teenage reaction. I want what I want and I want it now. So that doesn't really count in this, the why of avoiding hard conversations. It really is about feeling unworthy at depth. This idea that my experiences don't count because of what I've done, the acting out, the pain and heartbreak that I've caused my partner. Well, I did all this wrong, so I don't deserve to feel any kind of way. So I'm going to shut down my feelings, which,
Right.
by the way, doesn't help.
Mhm.
Like if you're shutting down your feelings, you're also shutting down any kind of connection. Then this idea of my issues are my own fault anyway. So it's not okay for me to ask for someone else to listen to them. I don't want to burden anybody else with this. Now, I've had that one since I was a wee one, right? I don't want to burden anybody else. I still have the occasional little twinge that comes in, but mostly I've learned not to, that I'm not actually burdening somebody else. Other people's problems are so much bigger than mine that mine don't count. Oh, well, I look at that person that in that country, they're starving. This person has just lost this many people in their family to flooding, right? But this is soul death by comparison. So comparing yourself to others makes your problems look smaller, and they may indeed be more manageable than somebody else's. But the fact is, they are your problems and they are weighing heavily and they're destroying parts of your life. So if you kill off your soul by comparison, you're also not going to do anything about it.
Mm.
So that's the shame and undeserving one.
What's number two?
Number two is the fear of being judged. There's a reason that we fear it so badly. Well, other than it probably happened when we were young, but we learned then to self judge. So we fear it so badly because we self judge ourselves so harshly that we become or are particularly sensitive to even the slightest perceived criticism, meaning that we're going to react and not well, angrily. We're going to hide. We're going to play the victim. When we were young, again, going to that, we probably felt either judged or felt that we had to be perfect to be okay or approved of or not to make waves. So any criticism of us would actually make us feel like we failed. And then we go to the conclusion of taking it inward and saying, I am a failure. So if anybody judges me now, I'm going to be a complete and total failure. I know it doesn't sound logical to somebody who doesn't actually suffer from that. For those who do, you're going to be able to relate.
Oh, and if you need more help on that matter, just come on over to my house and I'll break it down for you what it means to self criticize, self judge, self shame. Because isn't there a thought that if I do share this stuff, I'm going to be judged, humiliated, shamed, and I will appear as weak or fragile in the eyes of everybody else?
What we tend to do is to only share what we know we can back up, right? So sharing that deeper part of myself with somebody else opens me up to stuff that I may not be able to back up because now we're talking about feelings. We're talking about things that aren't concrete. We can't really say, okay, well, these are the facts, Jack. So I can back that up. But if I'm just revealing who I am, wow, there's no reason I should have to back that up or anybody should, but we feel like we do. And so any judgment that comes at us, we're going to take that as a judgment of who I am, not what I've done. We'll take it that way, even if the criticism is, hey, I don't like what you've done. We take it as, oh, I'm wrong. I am bad, which guess what? That's not fixable. We don't want to be perceived as lacking or deficient or downright unredeemable, in part because we already look at ourselves that way. Who wants that
Right.
confirmation, right?
Makes total sense. What's the third one?
Fear of being misunderstood. Talk about being buried in past experiences. Many people grow up being unheard, unseen, misinterpreted, which results in low self esteem. You get sensitive to criticism and also end up very often with a strong need or at least desire for validation from other people. So, constantly looking for that validation or praise. What happened with that is it left us feeling unheard, alone, frustrated, even angry and resentful and anxious when we feel like we're being misunderstood. And being misunderstood comes kind of easily because, as we'll get into, we don't necessarily communicate what we mean or how we're feeling very well because we don't have the practice. So, the fear, really, if I can sum it up, would be if I share my emotions, my fears, my difficulties, I won't be able to explain them clearly enough, and that will end badly. Being misunderstood is deep because of those early experiences of the not being seen or heard, and or being made wrong for just being me. I think that I've shown where that comes from and the depth of it. And it's really true for all of these points. There are some issues that can come up, behavioral issues that can come up from being misunderstood. We might tend to over explain ourselves, repeat information, become overly cautious in conversations to ensure that we're understood correctly, might even become tongue tied and unable to express ourselves, or just avoid difficult conversations entirely.
Number 4.
My issues cannot be fixed or aren't manageable. Even if I connect and discuss what's going on with me, those problems are just there permanently. They're intractable because I've tried fixing them, even though I didn't have maybe the right solutions. But I just have to face it. They'll always be there and I'll never be truly happy. This can actually show up if you're having trouble relating to that. Here's how it can show up in life: feeling constantly overwhelmed and stressed, having difficulty making decisions, or just having difficulty taking an action due to being so anxious. Isolation, withdrawing from social activities, friendships, family, numbing out to cope. The way you numbed out before, sexually or emotionally with another person, or porn, or basically having a relationship with that. Mindless activities. So you brought up gaming in the last one, like that, although some gamers will say it's not mindless, man. But yeah, mindless activities, alcohol, drugs, gambling, and big one, technology. We're all numbing out with iPads and Facebook, and, or as a friend calls it, the book face, feeling hopeless. So this is a very big one. This can range from just not having any faith that things are going to work out all the way to suicidal ideation. So it can be really, really dangerous. That depression can come on through that hopelessness, and it can just spiral really hard and really fast. So please, if you're feeling hopelessness, seek some help for it, some professional help for that, because you don't want it to spiral out. And then here's an odd one, but if you are neglecting personal hygiene or your basic needs, it can really indicate that there's something going on here with not believing that you can fix or manage what's going on in your life.
As we talk about this, I mean, we unfaithful, we are masters at avoiding. Betrayeds, male or female, really hate that we avoid, and rightly so.
Yep.
Betrayeds, male or female, just understand. I understand it completely. If you've ever had to talk to somebody who's masterfully avoided, I have a lot of people, and those of you that are watching that are clients of Sam's, I see you and I hear you and I'm proud of you for watching. I'm validating you and I'm telling you how grateful I am that you're listening right now, because I too have been and can be avoidant. But it's not enough just to say we're avoided and here's why we're avoided. So
Right.
now let's shift gears. Let's talk about some solutions. What are some solutions, James, as we navigate through avoidance?
So we have to recognize that those past experiences are wounds, we can call them. That might make it a little more visual and easier to attach to. That what they do is they create preemptive and reactive defenses that block conversation. And interestingly, even internal reflection, because we don't just avoid hard conversations with other people, we avoid having that hard reflection or hard conversation with ourselves because it's got the same effect for our inner being that we're fearful of on the outside of us. And that can happen even in therapy or coaching, as you well know,
Mm-hmm.
almost especially actually, because now I might have to fix this thing
Right.
and trust somebody to help me fix it.
And then we do little diversionary tactics. I don't like Sam. He's mean. He's tough on me. He doesn't listen, or he calls me out because we like to be avoidant because it's been a coping mechanism. But
Right.
you're about to talk about why we have to take this big leap of faith, if you will, right?
We are going to talk about that. I will also say I am a master avoider in therapy. And why? Because I go down tangents or I can lead a therapist off in a different direction because I know too damn much, right?
I see you. I
I
see you
know, right?
here.
That's always my prerequisite when I'm talking to a potentially new therapist. Are you going to call me on my stuff? Are you going to
Yeah.
catch me when I'm taking you down the rabbit hole here? And
It's difficult, right? It's a
yeah,
difficult step to allow people to dig around in our soul.
it is. It really is a leap, a giant leap, if you will, to share what we're feeling and dig deep into those roots of that resistance I was talking about and the experiences that form them. We can have big blocks against even the memory of those things. But I'll tell you what, if the behavior exists, they exist. It's just finding them. Sometimes
Right.
and you do have to work with what the reactions are and with the assumption that they're there. So a safe place to start this is with a therapist, a really trusted friend who can really hear you and doesn't just offer solutions or say, dude, just do this. A sponsor or mentor who actually wants to hear about these moments that impacted you. I'm going to say here, your partner's always wanted that. But at this time, they are not the person to do that because they are working on such deep trauma that you caused that they can't hear your stuff. It's not fair to them to do that. That will come a little farther down the line as there's some growth out of that trauma phase. So, what effect does this have? The talking to somebody and uncovering this, it will actually help you process all that past stuff that didn't get processed, just got buried and stuck, like something stuck in the works that just causes that jump in the cog. Yeah, life still works, but there's that missing tooth, right? So it'll actually help you process that past hurt in a supportive environment, which will then make those harder conversations easier because you're actually working on it. Don't expect this just to be boom. Oh, I've processed that. Now I can talk about these hard things like that. I won't feel any avoidance at all. We overcome that. So, some things that you want to look at when you're doing that is what feelings are coming up for me. One of the things that we really need to look for is what feelings do the prospects of having a hard conversation bring up in me? And what feelings do the prospects of sharing my feelings vulnerably bring up for me? Because that's going to give me the hint. It's not just fear, but what beyond that? That's going to give me a hint of, oh, maybe anger. What am I angry about? Where did that happen that I would be angry about that in my past? Going back to that piece about not sharing with your partner yet, eventually you're going to, and it's going to be a wonderful thing, but a word of warning: no blaming, no victiming, no pity parties. All of
Right.
those are going to be harmful to your partner. Even though you're saying you might be under the guise of I'm sharing these feelings honestly, you have to look at what impact is that going to have, and am I really throwing barbs?
Or is it that needs to be done with a third party because the partner is just too reactive and too hurt. You hit the nail right on the head. I mean, so many will say, I'm just sharing. I'm just trying to be vulnerable. Okay. We could spend an hour on this, do that with somebody else. Find an expert third party who's safe, who's the same sex that you can process with, that isn't going to give you advice or guidance and say, oh my gosh, your wife or your husband's just overreacting. Find someone who's an expert that can help you do it the right way. Because at some level, isn't there a lot of shame involved in this?
There is. So that shame and undeserving that we talked about as being one of the four is something that also needs to be in a part of the solution. So we need to look at these things specifically and what the solutions to those are. It's essential to have that dialogue with a trusted helper because it's going to help you shift from automatically self-shaming. That's how embedded and ingrained it is, and self-criticism, to self-acceptance and self-compassion. That could be likened to the journey from here to here, short journey, but not an easy one.
Right.
That when you do have some level of self-acceptance and self-compassion, that doesn't obviate the need for ownership and taking responsibility for our harmful actions, right? Knowing what experiences shaped your living in this shame helps you because then you have something tangible to work on. So you got to know those things. Recognizing your own triggers. What triggers you internally, your own thoughts, and so on, and externally, what somebody else may say or something you may see trigger that shame. So what of those experiences are triggering the shame? Very, very important to recognize, because if you know what those triggers are, at least the concrete ones that you can track, you can be prepared for them. Nothing like being prepared for a trigger. So another one in this is working on being more vulnerable, sharing your feelings with somebody you trust. Practice with whoever's helping you. Practice with your therapist, with your coach. That's going to help you. That's one of the beauties of the relationship with a therapist or coach is you learn how to be more vulnerable with these things. And you can get guidance as to how to do that with your partner or with other people that you're close to. Remember, vulnerability is authentic. That is what being authentic means. I can be vulnerable. I'm acting within my integrity. I'm showing you who I am. You're not hiding anything. Also important is that people are always scared of being vulnerable, right? Because, oh, it's going to result in exactly what I fear, and that's being wounded, being hurt, being harmed. Here's the paradox to that. Without it, we also cannot experience the peace and joy of being connected.
It's just so true.
So lastly, under the shame and undeserving, practice self-compassion. Speak kindly to yourself. Negative self-talk feeds shame. And there's this DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy technique, which is stop and replace, but there's a nice little acronym there. STOP, S-T-O-P. Stop tells you to stop, right? The S tells you to stop, interrupting the thoughts that you're having. T prompts you to take a few deep breaths. The T is the take a few deep breaths. O reminds you to observe what's happening in your body, your mind, emotions. And P allows you to proceed with how you've decided to respond. That keeps you out of reaction and keeps you out of spiraling in your own behaviors and feelings.
So, how do we deal with the great fear that we have of being judged?
So this is a big ask. Create an inner state of non-judgment of self. It's helpful if you're in non-judgment of others too. Because if you're judgy out there, you're probably very judgy in here. Remember, finger pointing, three back, right? That takes some work and some specific work. Identify what you actually fear being judged about. If you can do that, then you can, again, have something you can work with. So put out to another person small things that aren't going to be really highly impactful if trust is broken. So if you're judged for it, see how it's handled, then you can add a little more. That will then show you, oh, I can be vulnerable without being judged. obviously by the right person or people. Internally question your own criticism or criticism that comes your way. Is it really criticism from another person, or does it just sound like it because of my perception of somebody saying, even if it's giving me advice, can be, oh man, being criticized, because it gets funneled in to that whole perception piece of I'm being judged, I'm being criticized. Reality check yourself. How big and bad is that really? I'm not saying it's small. You're just reality checking it to see whether it is big and bad or whether it is, oh, okay, I can handle that. And then look even deeper. If it feels like criticism, or is it possibly there's some good advice in there? Could it be helpful or powerful even? So I'm going to analyze it. Okay, that person's saying that. Maybe they're just being a jerk, but is there any truth in that that could help me grow as a human being?
It makes great sense what you're saying because it just continues to prove an enormous fact that you and I have been sharing for decades, which is the right people will provide the right pathway, but the wrong people are typically going to mess it up and hurt you. So again, this continues to reiterate finding expert people that can help create safety. Now, what about when we're afraid of being misunderstood?
I think the first thing is to identify where in the past we have felt misunderstood. That is going to give us this place that we can go from and say, okay, what else is like that? That again is going to really help us get some ground on working on something and how to work on it. Validating ourselves is really important too. So if I'm feeling misunderstood, somebody else, I'm going to validate. It's all like that thought, stop, and replace that we just talked about. Maybe I'm going to stop. I'm going to stop, take a breath, and give myself some options and then move off of those. But I'm going to validate me for being the opposite of what I've just been told. That self-validation, I know people are going, okay, hippy dippy affirmations again, but they have been backed up by science very heavily, especially of late.
I would challenge anybody to go to war with us on self-validation because self-validation changed my entire life. Because you know what? If I had learned how to self-validate, I would have never chased the validation of another person, particularly my affair partner. So bring it, challengers of self-validation, because it might actually be able to transform you from the inside out. Okay, what else?
Learning to say things clearly. I like to say limit what you're saying to the other person, because the typical human being can take in three things. Yes, we're capable of seven or thereabouts. But three is really simple enough for us to be able to take that in and hold on to that and not minimize or reduce it down. I would also say, if you have a habit of saying it a lot of different ways, just limit that to two different ways. Try that. Eventually, you'll get really good at this and you'll just be able to say it once. Ask for clarification from others. And what I mean by that is, how did you hear what I said? How did you hear what I said? So that you know what I've just said got across. I mean, you're not going to do it like, did you hear what I said? You're going to do it in a much gentler way. Would you mind just telling me what you heard me say? Because I'm really working on this communication thing. And I want to make sure that I was clear. Then we've got to internally work on being open to feedback. So go back to that section on fear of being judged, because that feedback's really important. And it isn't a gnarly, nasty criticism. In this case, you're asking for it. So if people say, oh, you know what, you could have, if you had said it this way, that would have been clearer to me.
Yeah.
And I'll put the caveat on that, that everybody hears things a little differently. So that may have to change from person to person, but especially with your partner. Next would be building self-awareness. We've got to be able to recognize what our filters are. So I talked about recognizing your triggers. Now I want to recognize, what are the filters that I'm putting up as screens that information has to get through. And also perception. I call them perception funnels. So here's my filter, and that funnels down to that single pinpoint of I'm being misunderstood or judged or criticized. So that's the fear of being misunderstood. Solved in a nutshell.
Finally, our last one is, what kind of solutions do you suggest for those that are struggling, that they believe they just can't be fixed, they aren't manageable, and they're without hope?
Yeah. So it's so easy to get into that, isn't it? And thinking, I've just got all these issues. There's no way. It's too many. It's too big. Or those are too hard. There's no way that I can get through those. I'm stuck with that. What are your strengths? Because what we've got to find here is, if there's just this mishmash, I'll tell you what the brain is going to do, because the brain, and when it's in survival, always looks for the negative because it
Yeah.
wants to prepare to survive. So what we're going to do is we're going to pluck out the positives, and those are going to be called, from the EMDR arena, pillars of strength. They're the things that are foundational that you can build on. So make a list. What are my strengths? Keep making that list, because the first 3 or 4 are probably not going to be all there are. They won't be all there are. You might believe they are all they are. You might have to ask some friends, how do you see me? What do you think? What are my strengths? That could help. One way to do this is, in my recovery. So I'm going to just get specific about that. What steps have I taken where I feel some success? That's really important, because you're talking about specifically recovery. That gives you hope that you can do more. Now, some people, we have to just go to the basics. Okay, you're a successful business person. What made you successful? That does not mean that all business principles apply, because business doesn't have the feelings part in it, unless your business is like therapy or coaching. So it's really helpful. Those can be very helpful. How do I adapt those to my recovery? Here's a big one. Right? We've got this huge task. If we look at recovery in its total, it's going to be like, okay, forget that. That'd be like asking me to get on an F1 track tomorrow and beat Hamilton
Right.
and all that bunch, right? Not going to happen unless I, take them all out because I can't drive it. If I've got this huge task, I've got to break that down into smaller tasks, because otherwise it's absolutely stultifying. I'm going to be frozen by it. So if I can break it down into smaller, manageable tasks, then not only do I feel like they're approachable, they're doable, I can actually do them. I can make that happen. Then I go to the next small task. Before you know it, I've amassed a bunch of progress. There's nothing like success to motivate you and keep you going. If you do all that, you're going to feel empowered, and you're going to see that change is possible.
What I love about a lot of what we do is that if you're serious about recovery, you could literally sit down for these podcasts with a pen, and you could write out notes and follow those notes. And it's almost like a free therapy session or a coaching session, because for those of you that are unfaithful, I hope to God that when you listen, you take notes. I think that you could even listen to this with your partner and then talk about how to implement it in your day-to-day recovery work. I think there's so much great information in what you break down here, James. It is literally almost like a mini intensive in 30, 40 minutes for them to be able to walk away with a game plan and a strategy. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yes, except that they don't get to practice it with us. So,
No, but they still can take it and run with it and have something
yeah,
to invite an expert into doing it, because it's uber practical. If you're listening to this and it's like, oh, it's just too much, it's just too much, I would ask you to consider the possibility that you're getting overwhelmed, because this is very practical. And if you find the right person to help you walk through it with you, it can actually move the football of recovery several yards, don't you think?
yeah. The one thing that we strive for is to break these things down into, okay, here's the issue, which helps you recognize what's happening. Here are the solutions, which, granted, they're not complete solutions, but they are really good starting places, and they're really broken down so that it actually does make them smaller, doable tasks manageable tasks that will then give you that feeling of, oh, I'm having some success with these.
Absolutely. I've got people who are several years into recovery who watch these and go, dude, if I had known this years ago, I would have gotten to where I'm at now so much quicker with so much less collateral damage. And so I just want to tell you that are watching and listening, whatever platform you're on, make this part of your recovery on it. Take notes, process it, implement it, take it to your therapist or coach and go, hey, here's some great thoughts that really I need some help with because this seems like I could do this. I love that what we produce is doable. It's at some level even measurable, but it's absolutely accomplishable for those who are a day in recovery or years in recovery, don't you think?
Yes, we're doing it from our own experience, right? And you were talking earlier, and all that could go through my head was takes one to know one. So we do, like we've been through all of those things and we've been through really deep end hard stuff with this. And so this is really the benefit of the work that we've done to get to this place. And it still continues to be foundational for me. I use these things all the time.
Absolutely. And that's why you're never, if you're unfaithful, and of course, as a betrayed as well, you're never going to get an ounce of shame, condemnation, or harassment from us. You'll get some joking around because we've made some pretty monumental mistakes. I mean, there's people worse than us, I know, but we're pretty bad. And we don't revel in that. But we live in such a way where, man, we would never want you to feel judged. We keep it lighthearted at times because we have to, because this is painful and this is awful. But no matter where you're at, whatever country you might be in, and we do get email from all over the world, and we're so grateful. But we want you to know that you matter. Whether you are far, far away or you're in our own backyard like Texas or Florida or what have you, we just want you to know that number one, you matter. Number two, you're not without hope. Number three, if you have breath in your lungs, there's hope for you as a person. If we can help in any way possible, unfaithful or betrayed, please reach out to us. You can reach us at asktheunfaithful@gmail.com. We'd love for you to follow us and leave a comment. Everything that we do, we're trying to do it to our absolute best because you, the listener, the viewer, deserve that. And you deserve that of your own effort. So, as always, thank you for tuning in. We'll see you next time on Ask the Unfaithful.